everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Whomp Em, brought to us by Jaleco. Now Whomp Em actually has a pretty interesting history. Not only is it one of the few NES titles that has a Native American as its main character, it also is another one of those Japanese adaptations that was changed for the North American audience. In the original game, Saiyuuki World 2, which of course was a sequel to the original Saiyuuki World, you played as a Monkey King style character based on the Chinese mythology. As you can see from the original Japanese box art, you can definitely tell and see where they actually got the Chinese mythology, and it's interesting how this was changed into a Native American character carrying a spear instead of a pole, but also still being able to use the Nimbus Cloud. It's also interesting to note that the original Saiyuuki World game was actually based on another game itself, and it was actually really heavily adopted from the Monster World series. So here we go with Whomp Em for the NES. Whomp Em has us taking control of Soaring Eagle, a Native American who is trying to collect magical totems to prove that he is a real brave. After collecting the magical totems from each of the levels, we then go on to the final level of the game to face off with the real evil of the world. Now the game, in my opinion, is actually pretty colorful, and the controls work really well. It's actually one of my favorite little action platforms to pop in from time to time and give it a play. One of the few negative things you really can say about Whomp Em right away, though, is going to be that the game is relatively short, and it's not too difficult. Well, with that being said, the final boss itself is easily one of the toughest final bosses, in my opinion, in all the NES. The controls for Soaring Eagle are awesome. You start off with your basic spear, and you actually have an up thrust and a down thrust very similar to The Legend of Zelda 2. This allows you to actually also stand on the ground and hold your spear above you to protect you from above damage, as well as being able to just duck down under different projectiles as well. So you have an overall pretty good amount of things you can use to your arsenal in order to dodge and get around different attacks. The first little level of the game is a very short level just to get you kind of introduced to everything as we were making our way through it. You then move on to the selection screen, and you have 6 levels to choose from, and you can select them in any order. Completing a level will get you one of the magical totems, and like a Mega Man style-esque game, the magical totems gives you a new ability when you collect one. And the good thing is, they actually don't take up any of your health or any of a magic meter, so you can use them as many times as you want. Also, like Mega Man, some are more useful than others. In the first area of this level, you have a bunch of bamboo shoots that are going to be coming out of the sky towards you. Thankfully, walking underneath of a lot of them, you actually will have them be able to deflect over your head, as long as you don't try to actually jump and avoid them. The second area, move quickly down a whole set of trees, watching out for spiders on the trees themselves, shooting different projectiles at you. One of my favorite enemies is in this level though, the giant bear enemy. He moves rather slowly for you though, that you can be able to actually jump over him and avoid him for the most part, but he's definitely really cool to look at, and any really bear enemy is always usually going to be one of my favorites. The third area though here is a little bit more tricky. Not only do we have some ogres or demons trying to chase us down while we're moving upwards, we also have the bamboo shoots coming down. Like I said before, just heading towards the different ground areas, you'll be able to avoid the bamboo shoots, but while jumping upwards, the bamboo can actually hurt you. If you stand still on a platform though, you can use your spear to your defense and block the bamboo. It's now time for the first boss fight here. Since this is the first boss we're fighting, the basic spear is your best weapon, which is going to actually be the main strategy for most of the bosses. Run up and hit him once, or even maybe twice with the spear. He flies up overhead after exploding, so hit him once and back away so you don't get hit by the leaves that come out from the explosion. He then floats overhead dropping bamboo shoots. Just like you were able to during the level, you use your spear in order to protect yourself overhead and wait for him to work his way back down. When he lands, repeat the process over until he's able to be defeated. Once he's done, we get our first magical totem and we move on to the next level of the game. At the beginning of the Fire Mountain level, obviously there's going to be some lava set up throughout the level, as well as some dropping rocks, and these are probably the most annoying thing during the first segment, because they can easily break up momentum when you're trying to just run through. Other things in the game besides just the magical totems is also you have a few other objects, and that is some of the protection objects you can get where you'll see them build up at the bottom of the screen, but also you'll get these magical jars, and they're the most important thing to pick up. You're gonna definitely need at least 2 or 3 for the final boss of the game, so I recommend collecting as many as you can. The magical jars, once your hearts completely deplete, it'll refill your health all the way back up full. The other items that you can end up getting is the Flint Spearhead. This increases your attack strength. This appears in the lower left corner along with the Buffalo Headdress, which gives you increased defense, the Deerskin Shirt, which gives you invincibility for a short period of time. You can also get the upgraded Spear, as you've seen during the levels, and this gives you a slightly longer spear, but it goes away at the end of a level. You have magic potions, which I mentioned earlier, you have hearts, and then you have the gourds, the little fruits. If you're able to collect 12 of the gourds, you end up getting another heart to your health meter. One of the trickiest parts about the level is the platforms moving up and down in the lava. You have to actually jump at the right moment so that it'll actually propel you high enough so you can make it over to the next. For the second boss, this giant cloud rock enemy, you can actually use your downward thrust to help you out during this fight, doing a decent amount of damage over and over to it as it just floats around. After it gets down to like 2 hits left or so, it'll actually break apart into a giant flaming enemy. When he does this, he'll bounce around the room rather sporadically, and you'll have to be very careful to get in between his jumps so you'll still be able to land in hits. Hit him the last few times that you need to in order to get rid of him and move on to the third level. The ice level is rather interesting as it starts off with a giant drop downwards, and in order to get through this, we're pretty much just going to be jumping down each platform, usually staying around the middle of the screen to avoid landing on spikes on different platforms. When you get on a solid platform, you'll have to actually fight this demon guy, defeat him, and then the path will actually open up, allowing you to continue on. After defeating him, run to the next segment and you'll be dropping down once again. The hard part here, though, is you have enemies actually moving yourself upwards, as well as you have enemies just bouncing around going from left to right in an arcing pattern. One of the easiest ways to get through this, though, is either just jumping in between the enemies, or doing the downward thrust to help you out. The giant purple hands will actually send you back up, so if one catches you, quickly get off of it so you can continue working your way down. You'll then have to fight another one of the purple warriors, take him out with 3 hits, and then continue on. Jump up to the top level here and then quickly run across to avoid all the slime, then drop down the last hole to get to the boss fight. This giant demon head, when he first appears, hit him with your spear and he ends up breaking apart. You can see that when he breaks apart he has different shadow forms that go in all directions, and these can actually hurt you. So do your best to get into a corner and avoid getting hit by him, and just keep hitting him over and over again. Eventually he will turn red and angry, moving a little bit faster, but it's still the same ordeal. Keep hitting him, he'll explode every time you hit him, and then as soon as he reforms, hit him again. Once he's been taken down though, we move on to level number 4. At the beginning of the next level, you have some dragons that are going to come down at you. Do the downward thrust right directly on your head and you'll be able to catapult yourself directly over them. Once inside, you have these weird mannequin enemies that are going to start flying at you. They stand off for a few seconds and then eventually will start running at you. Right after them, you'll have to deal with TNT that's just lining the ground, so be sure to just jump in between them so you don't end up getting exploded. Work your way up, and then watch out for not only the rocks falling down, but there's usually at least one mannequin waiting for you on each platform. Thankfully, doing a quick jump with the downward thrust, you'll easily get over them each time. Over here, you'll see that you actually have a spear upgrade below you. Take out this guy on top first, and if the spear still is there, or you don't end up collecting one from that same enemy, you can then use the whirlwind ability that we got from one of the other enemies in order to actually open up the rock formations and go through. I really haven't used the magical totems throughout the area so far, but that's really because honestly, the normal spear is still the best overall attack in the game, whereas the magical totems are really used to help you get through different areas. These platforms, you have to jump back and forth in between them as they slowly will start to rise up, and when they get high enough, you'll eventually be able to make it to the next platform. Don't worry though, I will show at least a little bit of each of the totems as we make our way through. While the flame looks cool, it really isn't that effective. Easily the most one that we'll be using is the Nimbus Cloud style one. This wind cloud allows you to actually jump on it and float around the different platforms. For the next boss, this is the longest boss fight we've had so far. He bounces around as a giant cannonball, eventually breaking apart and throwing his arm at you. Of course, when he breaks apart though, you'll be able to actually hit him, and watch out for that arm as he throws it out, and it can damage you going out and of course, returning back to him. Do your best to jump over the arm and deliver a hit to the boss before he ends up reforming. After delivering enough hits though, you'll end up getting the next magical totem and we can move on to the next level. We now have only 2 more levels to travel through before the final stage of the game. This one being the water test. As to be expected, any multiple themed level with all the different fire and ice levels we've seen so far, of course, is going to have an underwater themed level. Here, while making your way down, watch out for the snail enemies. The different item that we got from the last level is the totem that actually allows you to throw your spears out. These do damage to some enemies, but for the most part really aren't useful. The best thing about them though is, you actually can only damage the final boss with this and one other move in the game. The next little segment is a little bit of a tight space, as you have different objects on the bottom of the level that are trying to hit you with bubbles, and then you have these giant jellies that break apart into little forms and try to chase you around. Do your best to avoid taking damage there, and then climb up the next segment, watching out for some mannequins. The worst part about the entire stage is these ice platforms. Not only are you slipping on them, but you also have water making its way down. If one of the little water things hits you, you lose all control of your character for a couple of seconds, causing you to go down a few platforms before you regain control. So do your absolute best to avoid getting hit by these. On the next screen, you have a mushroom that will try to drop down on you, and as you see after I defeated it, I was able to collect my 12th gourd of the game. This allows me to now get one more piece of heart in my total health meter, so now I'm up to 5. I grabbed the deerskin shirt, and this also gives me brief invincibility like I mentioned earlier. But I'm near the end of the stage anyway, so now it's time to battle the actual boss. Probably my favorite looking giant boss of the game, this giant pink frog with a cape will run at you back and forth, and you can jump on him using your downward thrust. He moves back and forth, and each time he does fire a projectile, but if you use the downward thrust to bounce over him, you'll easily avoid the projectile. He then turns into a mass of water and moves around the entire level. You can actually damage him during this segment as well. While he ends up being one of the easiest bosses in the game, he's also still one of my favorites. Either way, once he's defeated, we get the next magical totem, and we move on to the final one of the pre-levels, before we make it to the final challenge. The Sacred Forest level here is you actually have some weird butterfly-esque enemies flying overhead, which you can easily walk under. But then you also have flowers that are going to shoot pollen up, so be careful when making your jumps over the flowers that it doesn't accidentally tap you. The next segment is rather straightforward, as you just make your way down, watching out for slugs, and just bounce along their heads in order to propel yourself over. Then comes some fun part, as you actually have to bounce on the leaves, using them to bounce you high enough so you can make it to the next leaf over to the left. During this segment there are a few enemies, but thankfully not too bad, and you can also use their damage that they end up doing to you in order to help you as well. After mastering the control of the leaves, you now get to use it again as you have to propel yourself upward using the flowers as well as the leaves in order to make your way all the way to the top. Thankfully though, no enemies are here except for one or two near the very top it seems, so it's not too difficult. If you wonder what the ice totem actually does that we got in the last level, it actually can freeze enemies for a short period of time, allowing you to jump over them. For the next segment, you have this large mass come down at you, and you'll have to hit it a few times, and it just keeps falling over and over again. Just avoid getting it to land directly on you, and you can easily do damage to it. However, after doing enough damage, you find out that it's actually a giant cocoon housing a giant moth enemy. When this battle ends up beginning, it moves really quickly from different sides of the screen, but the hard part is not only dodging it, but also dodging the large amount of pollen it spews in diagonal patterns. Do your best to land in your hits correctly so you can do as much damage to it as you can when it gets to lower parts of the screen, or when it jumps above you, you can do an upward thrust to hit it. Just keep hitting it enough so you can drain all its health and grab the last of the magic totems as we move on to the final level of the game. The final level is rather tricky. It starts off with all these clouds, and you can see that some clouds are electrified, so if you land directly on top of them, you end up causing yourself damage. So you actually have to propel yourself using the clouds correctly in order to jump over the other parts. When you make it to these broken columns, you'll use the Nimbus Cloud in order to boost yourself upwards so you can make it through the open gaps. Get used to using the Nimbus Cloud here because you'll have to use it several times, also to avoid electrical clouds. Then switch over to the Whirlwind ability. Use this to break open the next column to the right, and you'll have to do this several times throughout the level in order to continue on. Like I said earlier though, the abilities really aren't about taking out enemies, but more so about helping you get through the different levels. Here, once again switch to the Whirlwind ability and break through the last couple of columns to make it to the next screen. Here you'll have to bounce up the clouds and slowly make your way upwards. Then you'll have the Scorpion and Skull enemies, which we actually fought as a boss earlier in the game, trying to attack you during this. Whenever they get onto the same plane as you, they end up moving exactly towards you. Next up, you have ice columns, so instead of using the Whirlwind, you're now going to use the Flame to help you out in order to bust open these gaps so you can continue on. Then you have some of the giant pink frogs we dealt with in the water level as the boss. I recommend using the Nimbus Cloud during these little gaps here so you can avoid as many of the enemies and be able to avoid slipping and sliding on the ice pedestals. Bounce along the clouds near the end here to avoid falling down to the tentacle mess below you. Then it's time for more bouncing clouds. You have the giant rock enemies that will try to attack you, just exactly like the scorpions did in the previous area. When you make it to the top though, it switches to night, and now you have the weirdest controlling area of the entire game. There's no gravity during this segment, so when you end up hitting a wall, you end up just floating in the direction that you ended up causing the momentum to start in. It's a little bit tricky at first, but the easiest way to avoid all this is by using the Nimbus Cloud, as it seemingly is not affected by the no gravity. Do your best to take the least amount of damage as possible during this, and make it all the way over to the end. After some more cloud jumping, make it to the next screen, and here you actually have flame guys as well as the boss from the other level as well, that was the cannonball. Just be careful, as this is the last room before the boss. I'll showcase really quickly the web ability. As you can see, it's really not going to help us out, as it does freeze some enemies, but that's about it. Now it's time for the final boss. He starts off with a portal. He ends up sending some of the tougher normal enemies out at you from the game. Take them out just like you would normally throughout the game, including the bear and then the guy immediately with the horn. He'll send out the purple guy from the ice level that you can bounce on his head or just stand underneath of him. Then the green soldier guy, who you can also bounce on his head using the downward thrust. The ice soldier guy that we saw on the ice level can easily be defeated, but then afterwards is the rolling enemy, and this guy is the worst enemy to deal with. Do your best to try to do jumping attacks, and you have to stand on the ground in order to get him to stop doing the rolling ability. Once he's done, it's time for the actual final boss. This is ridiculously tough. He can teleport to one of different areas of the screen, left, right, or center. He uses a giant blast that he builds up and then fires at you. The blast consists of either 4 big, medium, or small giant balls. And what you'll have to do with these things is you have to hit him whenever he's charging in order to get the different size that you want, I guess. You can only use the throwing spear to do damage and to break up the ability. I recommend being on the left side of the screen, have him in the center, and then break it at the biggest point, because this will allow you to instantly dodge any of the spears. However, if he ends up coming near you by the left side, you'll have to teleport to the other side, and doing this is really tricky, because even with the giant balls on the right side, they always seem to end up doing damage to you. Even walking too close to him with bad hit detection also causes you to lose damage. However, there is a way to deal with this guy once and for all, and that is the ability we got for beating all the previous levels. The reason I recommend coming into the battle with 2 or 3 of the magic jars is once you've had enough of actually trying to defeat him with the throwing spear, pull out the final dragon ability, then launch it at him. It does hurt you every time you do it, but it drains the final boss's health so quickly that after only a few of them being thrown, you'll defeat him and be able to sit back and enjoy the ending to Whomp Em. So after a rather short ending, we then go to our staff screen from Jaleco, and as I said, Whomp Em is actually a really fun platformer game with the different abilities that you're able to get. There's some cool unique platforming things throughout that you can use those abilities to help you out with. It's a very colorful game. The music's not too bad as well. The only thing bad about Whomp Em though is it is kind of easy and short, except of course for that final boss. So I can definitely see if you try to beat up the final boss without that big ability, you're definitely going to have a lot of trouble, and it's one of the toughest challenges to do on the NES in my opinion. After the credits though, you then get a many thanks for playing our game, and then it just sits there for a while until you press start, and you can start the game all over again. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.